As we dive into this emotional roller coaster, you'll witness the heartbreaking unraveling of Mark's life and the lengths he goes to reclaim control and protect his family. This isn't just a story about infidelity. It's about uncovering secrets that cut deeper than betrayal, exposing a dangerous game of blackmail and fraud orchestrated by someone Mark never expected to. Will Mark's strength and determination be enough to overcome the calculated attacks on his trust and loyalty? Or will the manipulative schemes of Chris destroy everything he's worked so hard to build? Stay tuned as we unravel the shocking twists and turns of this gripping tale. The evening sky painted the small, picturesque town of Maplewood in hues of orange and purple. Nestled between gently rolling hills and dense pine forests, the town was the kind of place that seemed frozen in time, a perfect postcard of suburban tranquility. But as anyone who lived there long enough would tell you, appearances could be deceiving. At the heart of Maplewood was the Johnson family. Mark and Lisa Johnson were the textbook definition of a successful suburban couple. Mark, 38, was a financial analyst with a penchant for routine and stability. He had a sturdy build, kind brown eyes, and an air of dependability that his colleagues and neighbors respected. Lisa, 36, was a freelance graphic designer who worked from home. Her creativity and warm personality made her a magnet for people, whether at the local coffee shop or during PTA meetings. Together, they seemed like the perfect pair. A house with a white picket fence, 2 adorable kids, and a golden retriever named Max. The Johnsons had been married for 12 years, and while their relationship wasn't without its challenges, they had always managed to navigate life's ups and downs together, or so Mark thought. The story begins on a chilly autumn evening in late October. The air carried the faint scent of burning leaves, and the streets were lined with glowing jack-o'-lanterns. Inside the Johnson household, the scene was cozy and familiar. Lisa was in the kitchen, chopping vegetables for dinner, while their 2 kids, Emma and Jake, argued over which movie to watch for family movie night. Mark walked through the front door, setting his briefcase down with a satisfied sigh. He had just landed a big account at work and was in high spirits. As he hung up his coat, he called out, "I'm home. What's for dinner?" Lisa poked her head out from the kitchen, her smile bright but fleeting. "Chicken stir-fry. How was your day?" "Great," Mark said, walking into the kitchen. "I finally closed that deal with the Simmons Group. We're looking at a pretty nice bonus this quarter." "That's fantastic," Lisa replied, her tone polite but distracted as she returned to chopping. "You deserve it." Mark stepped closer, placing a hand on her shoulder. "And how was your day?" Lisa hesitated for a fraction of a second before replying, "Oh, you know, the usual, busy with work and trying to keep these 2 from killing each other." Mark chuckled, unaware of the subtle tension in Lisa's voice. "Sounds about right." Later that evening, after the kids had gone to bed, Mark and Lisa settled on the couch with a glass of wine each. It was their quiet time, a ritual they had shared for years. But as Mark began talking about his plans for their upcoming anniversary, a weekend getaway to a quaint cabin in the mountains, Lisa's expression faltered. "Mark," she interrupted, her voice soft but firm, "about the trip. I'm not sure it's the best time." Mark frowned, setting his glass down. "Why not? It's been ages since we had some time to ourselves." "I know, but work's been crazy, and there's just so much going on with the kids' schedules. Maybe we can plan something closer to home." Mark studied her face, searching for answers she wasn't giving. "Lisa, is everything okay?" She nodded quickly, too quickly. "Of course I'm just tired, that's all." He didn't press further, chalking it up to the usual stress of juggling work and family life. But that night, as he lay in bed staring at the ceiling, a nagging feeling crept in. Lisa had been distant lately, more so than usual. She spent long hours in her home office, often claiming she was on tight deadlines. Her phone was always within arm's reach, and she seemed to guard it more closely than before. Mark dismissed these thoughts, convincing himself he was being paranoid. Over the next few weeks, small cracks in the facade of their marriage began to show. Lisa started attending more networking events, often coming home late and offering vague explanations. She seemed preoccupied during family meals, her phone buzzing constantly with notifications she brushed off as work stuff. Even her laughter, once so genuine and warm, felt forced. One evening, as Mark cleaned up after dinner, he noticed Lisa's phone vibrating on the counter. A message preview flashed on the screen. "Can't wait to see you again. Last night was amazing." Mark froze, his heart hammering in his chest. The message was from someone named Chris, a name he didn't recognize. Before he could process what he had seen, Lisa walked into the room. Her eyes darted to the phone, and she quickly grabbed it, the smile on her face too wide, too rehearsed. "Everything okay?" Mark asked, keeping his voice casual. "Yeah, just a client," Lisa replied, slipping the phone into her pocket. "Thanks for cleaning up." Mark nodded, but the seed of doubt had been planted. Over the following days, Mark couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Lisa's behavior became increasingly erratic. She spent more time away from home, often citing meetings or last-minute projects. When she was home, her mood oscillated between overly cheerful and irritable, depending on whether Mark asked questions about her day. One night, as Lisa showered, Mark found himself standing in front of her laptop, which she had left open on the dining table. He hesitated, battling the guilt of invading her privacy, but the memory of that message from Chris gnawed at him. Taking a deep breath, he opened her email. What he found confirmed his worst fears. There were dozens of emails between Lisa and someone named Chris. They weren't explicit, but the tone was unmistakably intimate. They spoke of stolen moments, secret plans, and shared jokes that felt far too personal for a professional relationship. Mark's chest tightened as he scrolled through the messages. His mind raced, a storm of anger, betrayal, and disbelief. How could this be happening? Lisa had always been his partner, his confidant. The idea of her being with someone else was unthinkable. When Lisa emerged from the shower, Mark was waiting for her in the living room, her laptop open on the coffee table. "We need to talk," he said, his voice steady but laced with tension. Lisa's eyes flicked to the laptop, her face paling. "What's going on?" Mark gestured to the screen. "You tell me who's Chris." For a moment, Lisa said nothing. Then she crossed her arms, her expression shifting to one of defiance. "You went through my emails. That's an invasion of privacy." "Don't turn this around on me," Mark snapped. "I saw the messages, Lisa. Don't insult me by pretending there's nothing going on." Lisa hesitated, her defenses wavering. Finally, she sighed and sat down on the couch. "It's not what you think," she began. "Chris is a friend, someone I met at a networking event. We've been talking, but it's harmless." Mark's jaw tightened. "Harmless, Lisa? These aren't the kinds of messages you send to a friend." Her eyes filled with tears, and she reached for his hand. "I'm sorry if it seems that way. I didn't mean to hurt you. I've just been feeling disconnected from you, from us." Mark pulled his hand away, his voice trembling. "So instead of talking to me, you turned to someone else?" "I didn't mean for it to happen," she whispered. "I'm sorry." Mark spent that night on the couch, his mind replaying their conversation over and over. Lisa's apology felt hollow, her explanation riddled with half-truths. He wanted to believe her, but the evidence pointed to something much deeper than a harmless friendship. As the days turned into weeks, the distance between them grew. Mark began noticing more inconsistencies in Lisa's stories, more red flags in her behavior. The trust they had spent years building was unraveling, and for the first time, Mark felt like a stranger in his own home. The stage was set for a revelation that would shatter the illusion of their perfect life, and Mark, though heartbroken, knew he couldn't turn a blind eye any longer. Mark had always prided himself on being a man of reason, someone who approached problems logically rather than emotionally. But as the days passed, the cracks in his marriage continued to deepen, and logic was becoming harder to cling to. The shadow of Chris loomed over every interaction he had with Lisa, turning even the most mundane conversations into a minefield. Lisa, for her part, tried to act as if nothing had changed. She was overly attentive to the kids, more engaged during family dinners, and even suggested they take a weekend trip to the countryside. On the surface, it seemed like she was trying to fix things, but Mark couldn't shake the feeling that it was all a distraction, a way to keep him from digging deeper. Frustration began to gnaw at Mark. He needed clarity, and Lisa's vague reassurances weren't cutting it. Late one night, as he stared at the ceiling from his spot on the couch, an idea took hold, a drastic step, but one he felt was necessary. The next morning, Mark called a private investigator. His voice trembled slightly as he explained the situation to a man named Tom. "I need to know the truth," Mark said, his words heavy with resolve. Tom, a seasoned investigator with a calm and measured tone, reassured him. "It's never easy to suspect someone you love, but I'll get you answers. Just be prepared. They might not be what you want to hear." Over the next week, Mark went through the motions of his daily life, but the weight of the investigation hung over him. Tom sent him daily updates, pictures of Lisa meeting Chris at a cafe, records of frequent text messages exchanged between them, and even a receipt for a gift Chris had given her. Each piece of evidence was a dagger to Mark's heart, but it also gave him the clarity he needed. One evening, Tom sent a video. Mark hesitated before opening it, his fingers hovering over the play button. When he finally pressed it, the screen filled with grainy footage of Lisa and Chris walking hand in hand through a park. They laughed, their body language unmistakably intimate. At one point, Chris leaned in to kiss her, and Lisa didn't pull away. Mark's chest tightened as he watched, a mix of anger, sadness, and betrayal washing over him. He closed the laptop, unable to watch any further. Armed with undeniable proof, Mark decided it was time to confront Lisa again. This time, there would be no deflecting, no vague excuses. He waited until the kids were in bed, then called Lisa into the living room. "We need to talk," he said, his voice steady but cold. Lisa froze in the doorway, her expression guarded. "What about?" Mark gestured to his laptop. "I know about Chris. I've seen the messages, the photos, the video." Her face drained of color. For a moment she said nothing, her lips parted as if searching for the right words. Finally, she sank into the armchair across from him. "Mark, I can explain." "Explain?" Mark's voice cracked, the anger he'd been holding back breaking through. "Explain what? That you've been sneaking around behind my back, that you've been lying to me, to our kids, while playing house with another man." Tears welled in Lisa's eyes, but Mark didn't feel the sympathy he once might have. "I didn't mean for it to happen," she whispered. It just happened." "That's not good enough," Mark snapped. "You don't just stumble into an affair, you made a choice." Lisa over and over again. Lisa buried her face in her hands, her sobs muffled but unmistakable. "I've been so unhappy, Mark," she admitted. "I felt invisible, like we were just going through the motions, and Chris, he made me feel alive again." Mark stared at her, his anger momentarily replaced by disbelief. "You think that justifies what you've done? If you were unhappy, why didn't you talk to me? Why didn't we try to fix things together?" "I tried," Lisa said, looking up at him, her tear-streaked face filled with anguish. "But you never listened. You were always so focused on work, on providing for the family, that you forgot about us." Mark shook his head, his hands clenching into fists. So instead of fighting for our marriage, you threw it away." The conversation ended in a stalemate, with Lisa retreating to the bedroom and Mark left alone in the living room. He sat in silence, the weight of her words pressing down on him. Had he been neglectful? Had he been so focused on being a provider that he failed to notice Lisa's unhappiness? But even as he questioned himself, a part of him knew the truth. Lisa had made her choice, and it wasn't him. In the days that followed, the tension in the house was palpable. Lisa avoided Mark as much as possible, her guilt evident in her every movement. Mark, meanwhile, threw himself into work, using it as a distraction from the crumbling state of his marriage. The kids began to pick up on the tension, their questions cutting straight to the heart of the matter. "Why are you and Mom fighting?" Emma asked one evening, her big, innocent eyes filled with worry. Mark forced a smile, crouching down to her level. "Sometimes grown-ups have disagreements, sweetie, but we both love you and Jake very much. That will never change." Emma nodded, but the sadness in her eyes lingered. It was another dagger to Mark's heart, a reminder of how deeply Lisa's betrayal was affecting not just him, but their entire family. One night, as Mark lay awake on the couch, staring at the ceiling, he came to a decision: he couldn't keep living like this, trapped in a marriage filled with lies and broken trust. He needed to move forward, for his sake and for the kids. The next morning, he sat down with Lisa at the kitchen table. "We can't keep doing this," he said, his voice steady but firm. "It's not fair to either of us, or to the kids. I think we need to separate." Lisa's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't argue. "I understand," she said quietly. "I'm sorry, Mark, for everything." For the first time in weeks, Mark felt a flicker of relief. It wasn't the resolution he had hoped for, but it was a step toward something better. As Mark began the process of untangling their lives, dividing assets, arranging custody agreements, and telling friends and family, he found himself rediscovering parts of himself he had long forgotten. He reconnected with old friends, picked up hobbies he had abandoned, and even started going to therapy. Lisa moved into an apartment across town, and while their interactions remained civil for the sake of the kids, the distance between them was undeniable. Mark knew it would take time to heal, but for the first time in a long time, he felt a glimmer of hope. Sometimes life throws us challenges we never see coming. Mark's journey was painful and messy, but it also taught him the importance of self-worth and resilience. And while his marriage didn't survive, he emerged stronger, ready to embrace the next chapter of his life. If you're enjoying this story, don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe to the channel for more gripping tales like this one. The crisp air of a winter evening settled over the neighborhood as Mark parked his car in the driveway, his mind swirling with unease. The decision to separate had been a relief in some ways, but it hadn't brought the closure he had hoped for. Something still felt unfinished, like a storm brewing just beyond the horizon. Inside, the house was quiet except for the muffled laughter of Emma and Jake playing upstairs. Mark's gaze drifted to the family photo on the mantel, the smiles now feeling like ghosts of a life he no longer recognized. As he turned away, his phone buzzed on the counter. It was Tom, the private investigator. His message was simple: "I think you'll want to see this. Can we meet?" Mark met Tom at a small cafe on the edge of town, the kind of place where no one asked questions. Tom slid a manila envelope across the table, his expression unreadable. "What is it?" Mark asked, his fingers hesitating on the envelope. "Proof," Tom said simply. "This isn't just an affair, there's more to it." Mark opened the envelope and began sifting through the contents. More photos, financial records, and emails. But it was the last item that made his blood run cold, a series of transactions from their joint account, all funneled into an unknown business labeled Crestview Consulting. "What's this?" Mark demanded, his voice a mix of confusion and anger. Tom leaned in, lowering his voice. It's a shell company. Chris is using it to siphon money and Lisa's been helping him. The words hit Mark like a freight train. He had suspected betrayal, but this was calculated. It wasn't just about the affair anymore. It was about deception on a scale he hadn't imagined. That night, Mark waited for Lisa to return home. When she finally walked through the door, her expression was a mixture of surprise and caution as she saw him sitting at the kitchen table, the envelope of evidence in front of him. "We need to talk," Mark said, his tone ice cold. Lisa hesitated but sat down, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "What's this about?" Mark slid the financial records toward her. "Crestview Consulting care to explain?" Lisa's face turned ashen. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't lie to me," Mark snapped, slamming his hand on the table. "I know everything. The money, the company, Chris. How long have you been stealing from me?" Tears welled in Lisa's eyes, but this time Mark wasn't moved. "I didn't steal from you," she whispered. "Chris said it was temporary, that it was an investment opportunity." Mark let out a bitter laugh. "An investment? You drained our savings for this?" Lisa's composure crumbled, her sobs breaking through. "I didn't know it would go this far. I thought it was just a way to start over. I didn't mean to hurt you." Mark stood, his chest heaving with anger. "You didn't mean to hurt me. You destroyed everything we built, Lisa. For what, a scam artist and a fantasy?" Lisa didn't answer, her head bowed in shame. For the first time, Mark saw the full weight of her guilt, but it brought him no solace. The damage was done. Mark knew he couldn't let this go unchecked. Over the next few days, he worked with Tom to gather more evidence, not just of Lisa's affair, but of the financial fraud. If Chris thought he could get away with this, he was about to learn otherwise. Through Tom's connections, Mark discovered that Crestview Consulting was on the verge of a major deal, a deal that would transfer what remained of Mark's savings into Chris's hands. It was a now or never moment, and Mark wasn't about to let them win. One evening, Mark received a text from an unknown number. "Meet me at the Crestview office. We need to talk, Chris." Mark stared at the message, his gut telling him it was a trap, but he couldn't ignore it. If there was a chance to confront Chris and put an end to this nightmare, he had to take it. He didn't go unprepared. Tom had insisted on equipping him with a small recording device and a discreet backup plan, a friend waiting nearby, ready to call the police if things went south. The office was a dimly lit space in an old industrial building. When Mark arrived, Chris was already there, leaning casually against a desk. He was everything Mark had imagined: tall, slick, and exuding an air of confidence that bordered on arrogance. "So you're the husband," Chris said with a smirk. "I was wondering when we'd finally meet." Mark stepped forward, his fists clenched. "Cut the crap. I know what you've been doing. You think you can steal from me and walk away?" Chris chuckled, his demeanor unshaken. "Steal Lisa came to me, man. She wanted out, and I gave her away. If you couldn't keep her happy, that's on you." Mark's anger boiled over. "You conned her, just like you're trying to con me. But it's over. I've got the evidence, and the police are going to love it." Chris's smirk faltered for a moment, but he quickly recovered. "You think you're smart, don't you? But you're in over your head." Before Mark could respond, the door behind him opened and two men stepped in. Both broad-shouldered and intimidating, Mark's pulse quickened. This wasn't just a confrontation, it was a setup. As the tension in the room reached its peak, Mark's backup plan kicked in. Tom's friend, stationed outside, called the police, reporting a suspected crime in progress. The sound of sirens grew louder, cutting through the cold night air. Chris's confidence crumbled as the flashing red and blue lights illuminated the office windows. "What the hell is this?" he snarled, turning to Mark. Mark's voice was steady, even as adrenaline coursed through him. "It's the end of your little game." The police burst into the room moments later, Their presence commanding and undeniable, Chris and his associates were handcuffed and led away, their protests falling on deaf ears. Lisa, who had arrived shortly after the confrontation began, watched in stunned silence as her lover was taken into custody. In the days following the dramatic confrontation, Mark worked tirelessly to clean up the mess Lisa and Chris had created. With Tom's help, he provided the authorities with enough evidence to ensure that Chris faced charges not only for fraud, but also for his role in manipulating Lisa. Lisa, meanwhile, was left to grapple with the fallout of her actions. The kids were told a carefully curated version of the truth, one that shielded them from the darkest details, but left no doubt that their parents' lives were changing forever. For Mark, the experience was both devastating and liberating. He had faced the ultimate betrayal, confronted his fears, and emerged stronger. The life he had once known was gone, but in its place was a sense of clarity and purpose he hadn't felt in years. If you're hooked on this intense story, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to the channel for more gripping recaps and tales of resilience. The aftermath of the confrontation with Chris brought a whirlwind of emotions for Mark: relief, anger, and a hollow sense of victory, intertwined in a way that left him feeling more drained than triumphant. Chris had been arrested, his fraudulent schemes laid bare, but the scars left by Lisa's betrayal weren't as easily resolved. Days after the dramatic takedown at the Crestview office, Lisa asked to meet with Mark. Her voice, soft and filled with remorse, carried over the phone. "Please," she said, "I need to explain." Mark agreed, but his resolve was firm. They met at a quiet park bench, a place that once held fond memories of family outings. Now it felt like neutral ground, a space where the past and present collided. Lisa's face was pale, her eyes rimmed with dark circles that spoke of sleepless nights. "I don't know where to start," she admitted, her voice trembling. Mark crossed his arms, keeping his distance emotionally and physically. "Start with the truth," he said coldly. "For once." Lisa inhaled deeply, her hands fidgeting in her lap. "It wasn't supposed to go this far," she began. "At first it was just an escape. I felt like I was drowning, Mark. Like I wasn't even a person anymore. Just a wife, a mom, a shadow in your life." Mark's jaw tightened, but he said nothing, allowing her to continue. "Chris, he was charming, exciting. He made me feel seen," she confessed, her voice breaking. "But I didn't realize he was using me. The money, the company. It was all his idea. I was so desperate to hold on to something that I didn't see what he was really doing." Mark's chest ached as he listened, but his expression remained stoic. "You expect me to believe you didn't know what was happening?" Tears streamed down Lisa's face. "I swear I didn't. I was stupid and selfish, but I never meant to hurt you or the kids. I lost myself." Mark looked away, his gaze fixed on the horizon. Her words stirred something within him, a mixture of pity and fury. He wanted to scream, to demand why she hadn't come to him when she felt lost. But deep down, he knew the answer. They had both failed each other in different ways. The hardest part for Mark wasn't facing Lisa's betrayal. It was explaining to Emma and Jake why their lives were changing so drastically. He and Lisa decided to sit the kids down together, determined to present a united front despite their fractured relationship. In the living room, the kids sat side by side on the couch, their small faces filled with worry. Mark knelt in front of them, his voice calm but heavy with emotion. "Mom and I have something to tell you," he began. "We love you both very much, and that will never change. But we've decided it's best if we live in separate homes." Emma's eyes widened, tears spilling over as she clutched her stuffed bear tightly. "Are you getting a divorce?" she whispered. Lisa nodded, her own tears streaming freely. "Yes, sweetie, but it's not your fault. We're still your mom and dad, and we'll always be here for you." Jake, who had been silent, suddenly burst out, Why can't we just stay together?" Mark's heart broke at the anguish in his son's voice. "Sometimes, grown-ups make mistakes," he said softly. "And sometimes, those mistakes mean we can't live together the way we used to, but that doesn't mean we love you any less." The conversation ended with the kids clinging to both their parents, their small arms wrapping around them in a way that made Mark's chest ache with guilt and love. He knew they didn't fully understand the complexities of what was happening, but he vowed to be the best father he could be in the face of their pain. As the legal proceedings against Chris unfolded, Lisa's involvement came under scrutiny. Though it was clear she had been manipulated, her participation in the financial fraud couldn't be ignored. Mark watched from a distance as she faced the consequences of her choices, her once vibrant world crumbling around her. She lost her freelance clients, her reputation tarnished by the scandal friends who had once admired her charm and creativity now avoided her, their judgment palpable. The apartment she had moved into felt cold and empty, a stark contrast to the family home she had left behind. Lisa's remorse was genuine, but it came too late to repair the damage. She reached out to Mark several times, offering apologies and asking for forgiveness. Each time, Mark listened but gave no promises. He wasn't ready to forgive, not yet. While Lisa faced the fallout of her actions, Mark focused on rebuilding his life. He threw himself into his work, using it as both a distraction and a way to regain control. But it wasn't just about his career. Mark also began to rediscover the parts of himself he had neglected during his marriage. He reconnected with old friends, joining them for weekend hikes and casual dinners. He signed up for a woodworking class, a hobby he had long admired but never pursued. And for the first time in years, he allowed himself to dream about the future, not the one he had planned with Lisa, but a new one, filled with possibilities he hadn't yet imagined. One evening, as Mark sat on his newly renovated porch, he found himself scrolling through his phone. A message from an old college friend, Sarah, caught his eye. They had reconnected on social media a few weeks earlier, exchanging casual updates about their lives. Her latest message was simple. "Let me know if you ever want to grab coffee and catch up." Mark hesitated for a moment before typing a reply. "How about this weekend?" The following Saturday, Mark met Sarah at a cozy cafe downtown. The conversation flowed effortlessly, their shared history creating a comfortable familiarity. As they laughed over stories from their college days, Mark felt a warmth he hadn't experienced in a long time, a sense of connection that wasn't weighed down by lies or betrayal. By the end of their meeting, Mark realized he wasn't just healing, he was beginning to move forward. Despite his progress, there was one loose end Mark couldn't ignore: Lisa. Their separation had been amicable on the surface, but there were still unresolved emotions between them. Mark decided to meet her one last time, determined to find closure. They met at a quiet park, the same bench where they had sat weeks earlier. This time, Lisa looked more composed, though the pain in her eyes was still evident. "I wanted to say goodbye," Mark said, his voice steady. "Not just to you, but to the life we had. I need to let go of the anger and the hurt, for me and for the kids." Lisa nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. "I understand, and I'm sorry, Mark, for everything." Mark offered her a small, bittersweet smile. "I hope you find peace, Lisa. I really do." As he walked away, the weight on his shoulders felt lighter. He wasn't walking toward a perfect life, but he was walking toward a better one. If you've been moved by this emotional journey, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel for more powerful stories like this one. Mark's life had been a whirlwind of chaos, emotions, and revelations, but now the storm was nearing its crescendo. Each day brought him closer to a resolution he could feel in his bones, While the past had taken its toll, it was the lessons he'd learned that propelled him forward. However, the final chapter of this saga wasn't going to let him off easy. Weeks after their last conversation, Mark received a call from Lisa. Her voice was cautious, almost pleading. "Can we meet? There's something important I need to tell you." Reluctantly, Mark agreed, though he couldn't shake the feeling that this was another attempt to mend a bridge that had long since burned. They met at a small diner, one of Lisa's old favorites. She seemed nervous, her hands trembling slightly as she wrapped them around a steaming cup of coffee. "I've been thinking a lot about everything," she began, her voice low, "and I want to make things right, as much as I can." Mark raised an eyebrow, unsure of where this was going. "How do you plan to do that?" Lisa took a deep breath. "I've been working with the investigators handling Chris's case. I'm giving them everything I know, every document, every conversation I want to help bring him down." Mark's skepticism was evident. "And why now? Why not months ago, when you knew what he was doing?" "I was scared," Lisa admitted, tears brimming in her eyes. "I thought I could fix it on my own, but I was wrong. I'm not doing this for me. I'm doing it for the kids and for you." Mark studied her face, searching for any sign of deception. Finally, he nodded. "If you're serious about this, then do it, but don't expect me to clean up the mess if you back out." With Lisa's cooperation, the case against Chris gained momentum. The authorities built an airtight case, gathering evidence that painted a damning picture of his schemes. As the trial date approached, tensions ran high, especially for Mark. While Chris's arrest had been a victory, the idea of facing him in court was daunting. Tom, ever the dependable investigator, met with Mark to prepare him for the stand. "Just tell the truth," he advised. "Stick to the facts, and don't let his lawyers rattle you." Mark nodded, though his anxiety was evident. "I just want this to be over." "It will be," Tom assured him. "And when it is, you'll finally have closure." The day of the trial arrived, and the courthouse buzzed with tension. Mark entered the courtroom with his lawyer Carter by his side. His eyes immediately landed on Chris, who sat at the defendant's table, his smug demeanor unshaken despite the mountain of evidence against him. Lisa sat in the gallery, her expression somber. She had been called as a key witness, and though her cooperation was appreciated, Mark couldn't ignore the pang of resentment he still felt. The trial began with opening statements, each side presenting their version of the events. The prosecution painted Chris as a manipulative con man who had exploited Lisa's vulnerabilities and betrayed Mark's trust. The defense, however, tried to spin a narrative of mutual consent and blurred lines, claiming Chris and Lisa were simply misunderstood business partners. When it was Mark's turn to testify, the weight of the moment hit him like a freight train. As he took the oath and sat in the witness chair, he felt the eyes of the entire courtroom on him. Carter led him through his testimony, guiding him with a calm, steady presence. Mark recounted the events that had led to the confrontation at Crestview, the discovery of the fraudulent transactions, and the emotional toll of Lisa's betrayal. His voice trembled at times, but his resolve never wavered. The defense attorney tried to discredit him, suggesting he had exaggerated the extent of the fraud and manipulated Lisa into cooperating with the prosecution. But Mark stood firm, his answers clear and unwavering. By the time he stepped down, he felt a flicker of pride. He had spoken his truth, and no one could take that from him. Lisa's testimony was perhaps the most emotional moment of the trial. She recounted her relationship with Chris, the promises he had made, and the lies she had believed. Tears streamed down her face as she admitted her mistakes, her voice breaking as she apologized to Mark in front of the entire courtroom. "I let myself be blinded by my own unhappiness," she said. "And in doing so, I hurt the people I love most. I can't undo what I've done, but I can help make sure Chris answers for his crimes." Mark watched her with a mix of emotions, anger, sadness, and a faint glimmer of respect. While he couldn't forget her betrayal, he couldn't ignore her courage in owning up to her actions. After days of testimony and deliberation, the jury reached a verdict. The courtroom was silent as the foreperson stood to deliver it. "We find the defendant, Christopher Lang, guilty on all counts." A collective sigh of relief swept through the room. Chris's smug expression finally cracked, replaced by a look of disbelief and anger as he was led away in handcuffs. Mark felt a surge of vindication, but it was bittersweet. While justice had been served, it didn't erase the pain of what he had endured. Still, it was a step forward, a chance to rebuild without the shadow of Chris hanging over him. With the trial behind him, Mark began to focus on his future. He finalized his divorce from Lisa, ensuring a fair custody arrangement for Emma and Jake. Though their relationship was strained, they worked together to create a sense of stability for the kids. Mark also began to explore new opportunities, both personally and professionally. He took on more challenging projects at work, joined a local community group, and even started dating again. Each step was a reminder that life could move forward even after the darkest of times. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more incredible stories of resilience and redemption. The courtroom victory against Chris was a turning point, but Mark's journey was far from over. The legal battle might have been won, but the emotional and relational wounds were still fresh. As he began piecing his life back together, new challenges emerged, ones that forced him to confront the depths of his resilience and the strength of his character. Chris's conviction sent ripples through the community. It wasn't every day that a scandal of this magnitude unfolded in a quiet suburban town like theirs. Neighbors whispered, former friends distanced themselves, and the local news milked the story for every headline it could muster. For Mark, this meant navigating a world where everyone seemed to know his business. At work, he felt the lingering stares and hushed conversations behind his back. While some colleagues expressed sympathy, others couldn't hide their curiosity. It was exhausting, but Mark kept his head down and focused on his projects. If he had learned anything from the past year, it was that the only way out was through. Lisa, too, was facing the consequences of her actions. Her reputation had been tarnished beyond repair, and the once vibrant social life she had cultivated was now a distant memory. Friends avoided her, former clients refused to return her calls, and even casual acquaintances seemed to offer nothing but cold shoulders. Mark occasionally heard about her struggles through mutual friends. Part of him wanted to feel vindicated, but instead he felt a dull ache, a reminder of the person she used to be before everything fell apart. One afternoon she called him. "Mark, I need a favor," she said, her voice hesitant. Mark's grip on the phone tightened. "What is it?" "I'm looking for work," she admitted, "but no one will give me a chance. I was hoping you might know someone. Maybe put in a good word." Mark sighed, the weight of her request settling over him. "Lisa, I don't think I can help you with that." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "I understand," she said quietly. "I just thought I'd ask." As he hung up, Mark felt a pang of guilt. Despite everything, there was still a part of him that wanted to see her rebuild her life, but he also knew he couldn't be the one to save her. That was a journey she would have to take on her own. In the months following the trial, Mark immersed himself in self-reflection. Therapy sessions became a cornerstone of his healing process, offering him a safe space to unpack the layers of betrayal, anger, and grief he had carried for so long. "I don't want to just survive this," he told his therapist one evening. "I want to grow from it. I want to be better, not bitter." Through these sessions, Mark began to understand the dynamics of his marriage in ways he never had before. He realized that both he and Lisa had contributed to its breakdown, though her choices had ultimately driven the final wedge between them. This understanding didn't absolve her of blame, but it allowed him to release some of the resentment that had weighed so heavily on his heart. As Mark worked to rebuild his personal life, a surprising opportunity arose at work. His boss, impressed by his recent projects and unwavering focus, offered him a promotion, one that came with a significant raise and the chance to lead a major client account. "This is your moment, Mark," his boss said during the meeting. "You've proven you can handle anything thrown your way." Mark accepted the promotion with a mix of pride and humility. It wasn't just a professional victory, it was a validation of his strength and perseverance. One evening, as Mark walked through the local farmer's market, he spotted Sarah, the college friend he had reconnected with after the trial. She was browsing a stall of fresh flowers, her smile as radiant as he remembered. "Mark," she called out when she saw him. "Fancy seeing you here." They fell into an easy conversation, catching up on the little details of their lives. Sarah's warmth and wit were a balm to Mark's weary soul, and before long he found himself asking if she'd like to grab dinner. "I'd love to," she replied, her smile widening. As Mark's relationship with Sarah blossomed, he found himself at a crossroads. The emotional baggage from his marriage still lingered, and he knew he couldn't fully embrace a new chapter until he let go of the past. One evening he sat down with a box of mementos from his life with Lisa, photos, cards, and trinkets that had once symbolized their love. Each item carried a memory, both beautiful and painful. With a deep breath, Mark began sorting through the box. He kept a few items for the kids, pieces of their family history he felt they had a right to hold on to, but the rest he packed away. It wasn't an act of erasure, it was an act of acceptance. The life he had with Lisa was over, but the lessons he had learned would stay with him forever. With the past behind him, Mark leaned into his future with renewed optimism. His relationship with Sarah brought him a sense of joy and stability he hadn't felt in years. They took things slow, savoring each moment and building a foundation of trust and respect. At work, Mark thrived in his new role, earning the admiration of his colleagues and the satisfaction of knowing he was capable of achieving great things. He also made time for Emma and Jake, ensuring they felt loved and supported as they adjusted to the changes in their family dynamic. One evening, as he sat on the porch with Sarah, watching the sunset, Mark felt a sense of peace he hadn't known in years. The journey had been long and painful, but it had led him to a place of clarity and purpose. If this story has inspired you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel for more powerful tales of resilience and redemption. The weeks following Mark's promotion and his budding relationship with Sarah felt like a quiet reprieve, but the calm wasn't destined to last. While Mark was finding stability in his new life, the lingering shadows of the past threatened to resurface in ways he couldn't have anticipated. One morning, as Mark sipped his coffee and sorted through the mail, a plain white envelope caught his eye. The return address was unfamiliar, but as he opened it, his stomach dropped. Inside was a handwritten letter from Chris. The words were scrawled hastily, filled with a mix of anger and desperation. "Mark, you think you've won, but this isn't over. You ruined me, and I won't forget it. Watch your back." Mark's hands trembled as he read the letter again, his mind racing. Was this an empty threat, or was Chris capable of something more sinister? The man had already proven himself manipulative and dangerous, and now he was desperate. Mark decided not to tell Sarah or the kids, at least not yet. He didn't want to worry them unless it became necessary. Instead, he contacted Tom, the private investigator, to assess the situation. As the days passed, Mark couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. Cars he didn't recognize seemed to linger near his house, and once, while walking to his car after work, He thought he saw a figure in the shadows. When he turned, there was no one there, but the unease gnawed at him. Tom's investigation revealed nothing concrete, but he advised Mark to be cautious. Chris may be behind bars, but people like him often have connections, Tom warned. Don't underestimate him. Mark took the advice to heart, installing additional security cameras around his home and changing his routine to avoid predictability. Despite these precautions, the tension in his chest refused to ease. One evening, as Mark and Sarah returned from a dinner date, they found a package sitting on Mark's doorstep. There was no return address, and the handwriting on the label was unfamiliar. Mark's heart pounded as he picked it up, a sense of dread washing over him. Maybe it's nothing, Sarah suggested, though her voice betrayed her own unease. Mark carried the package inside and carefully opened it. Inside was a small, battered notebook. Flipping through the pages, he realized it was filled with notes and photos, documents Chris had collected during his schemes. But what caught Mark's attention was the final entry. Mark thinks he's free, but everyone has a weakness. Let's see how long his peace lasts. The words sent a chill down Mark's spine. Was this a final mind game from Chris, or was someone else involved? Unable to ignore the threat, Mark decided to confront Lisa. She had been closer to Chris than anyone, and if anyone could shed light on his motives, it was her. They met at a park bench, their conversations there having become an uncomfortable routine. Lisa looked worn, her once vibrant energy now replaced by a quiet resignation. "I got a letter," Mark began, handing her a copy of Chris's note. "And then this package showed up." Lisa's face paled as she read the words. "He's in prison. How could he—" "You tell me," Mark interrupted, his tone sharp. "You knew him better than anyone? Is this just another one of his games, or should I be worried?" Lisa hesitated, her eyes filled with guilt. Chris had people friends, associates. He always talked about having backups in case things went south. Mark's stomach sank. "Backups?" Lisa nodded. "He never gave me specifics, but he always said he had a way to keep control, even if he wasn't around." Mark clenched his fists, anger and frustration bubbling to the surface. "You should have told me this sooner." "I didn't think," Lisa began, but Mark cut her off. "You didn't think that's the problem, Lisa. You never thought about the consequences." Lisa's eyes filled with tears, but Mark had no sympathy left to give. He stood and walked away, leaving her sitting alone on the bench. Determined to protect his family, Mark decided it was time to take matters into his own hands. He reached out to Carter, his lawyer, and together they worked on securing a restraining order against Chris, even from behind bars. While it wouldn't stop a determined associate, it sent a clear message that Mark wasn't backing down. Tom continued his investigation, digging deeper into Chris's connections. What he uncovered was alarming: a small network of individuals who had benefited from Chris's schemes, some of whom had ties to unsavory organizations. While none of them had made any overt moves, the potential for danger was real. The tension reached its peak one night when Mark's home alarm blared at 3 a.m. He bolted out of bed, his heart racing as he grabbed the baseball bat he kept by his bedside. Sarah, who had been staying over, followed closely behind. The security cameras revealed a figure in a hoodie lurking near the backyard. Mark called the police, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through him. By the time the authorities arrived, the intruder was gone, but they found signs of tampering around the back door. The incident solidified Mark's resolve. He wouldn't let Chris or anyone else dictate his life. The next day, Mark held a family meeting. He explained the situation to Emma and Jake in age-appropriate terms, assuring them that the added security measures were just a precaution. He also told Sarah, who insisted on staying by his side. "We're in this together," she said firmly, her hand clasping his. Mark's heart swelled with gratitude. For the first time in months, He felt like he wasn't facing the storm alone. Tom's investigation finally bore fruit. He discovered that one of Chris's former associates, a man named Vincent, had been behind the recent threats. Vincent had hoped to intimidate Mark into dropping his pursuit of Chris's remaining assets, which were tied up in a legal battle. With this information, Mark and Carter acted swiftly. Providing the evidence to law enforcement, Vincent was arrested, his connection to the threats confirmed. The news brought a wave of relief, though Mark knew the fight wasn't truly over until every loose end was tied up. The intense weeks of fear and uncertainty left Mark changed. He was no longer the man who let life happen to him. He was a man who took control, who fought for his peace and his family. As he stood on his porch one evening, watching Emma and Jake play in the yard while Sarah laughed with them, Mark felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. The past had tested him in ways he never could have imagined, but it had also forged him into someone stronger, someone ready for whatever life had in store. If you're enjoying this roller coaster of resilience and redemption, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more gripping stories like this one. The air felt heavy with anticipation as Mark stood on his porch, looking out over the quiet street. The threats had subsided for now, but a lingering sense of unease remained. He wasn't the same man who had once ignored the small cracks in his marriage and life. Now, every detail mattered, every moment carried weight, and he was determined to stay ahead of whatever came next. The confrontation with Chris's associate, Vincent, had left Mark shaken but resolute. It was clear that Chris's reach extended further than he'd anticipated, and even from prison, he could cause havoc. Mark's priority was to ensure his family's safety and finally put this chapter of his life behind him. The first step was tightening security. Mark upgraded his home's alarm system and hired a professional to assess vulnerabilities. Cameras now covered every angle. Motion sensor lights lit up the property at night, and the kids were instructed never to open the door without checking first. It felt like living in a fortress, but Mark knew it was necessary. Sarah was a constant source of support during this time. She moved in temporarily, helping with the kids and keeping Mark grounded. "We'll get through this," she assured him one evening as they sat on the couch. Her confidence gave Mark strength, and for the first time, he began to see a future beyond the chaos. A few weeks later, Mark received a call from Tom. "You need to come down to my office," Tom said, his tone urgent. "I've uncovered something you'll want to see." Mark's stomach churned as he drove to meet Tom. He walked into the office where Tom handed him a file labeled Lang's Network. Inside were documents detailing Chris's financial activities, but what caught Mark's eye was a name he hadn't expected. Lisa Johnson, Tom explained. "It looks like Chris had Lisa listed as a co-signer on one of his offshore accounts. Whether she knew about it or not, this ties her to some of his dealings." Mark's hands clenched as he stared at the file. He thought Lisa's involvement with Chris had been limited to their personal relationship, but this suggested something deeper. "I need to confront her," Mark said, his voice firm. Mark called Lisa and asked her to meet him at a neutral location, a quiet cafe on the outskirts of town. She arrived looking wary, her eyes scanning the room as if expecting another ambush. "What's this about?" she asked as she sat down. Mark slid the file across the table. "Care to explain this?" Lisa's face paled as she flipped through the pages. I didn't know," she stammered. "Chris told me it was just paperwork to keep things organized. I didn't sign up for anything illegal." Mark's voice was cold. "Whether you knew or not, your name is on these accounts. Do you realize what this means? You're still tangled up in his schemes." Tears filled Lisa's eyes, but Mark didn't waver. "You need to cooperate with the authorities again," he said. "This isn't just about you anymore. It's about keeping our kids safe." Lisa nodded, her voice trembling. "I'll do whatever it takes." With Lisa's renewed cooperation, the authorities began unraveling even more of Chris's network. The deeper they dug, the more evident it became that Chris had been running an elaborate operation, with multiple people complicit in his schemes. Each new revelation added to the weight on Mark's shoulders. Would it ever truly be over? One night, while reviewing the latest updates with Carter, Mark asked the question that had been haunting him. "Do you think this will ever stop, or will Chris find another way to keep coming after me?" Carter leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. "People like Chris thrive on control. The more we dismantle his power, the harder it will be for him to come after you. But you need to be prepared for the long game. He won't give up easily." Mark nodded, his resolve hardening. "Then neither will I." The climax came unexpectedly in the form of a court subpoena. Chris, desperate to regain some semblance of control, had filed a motion to contest the seizure of his remaining assets. This meant Mark would have to face him in court again, a prospect that filled him with equal parts dread and determination. The courtroom was packed on the day of the hearing. Mark sat at the plaintiff's table, flanked by Carter and Tom, while Chris entered in handcuffs, his once confident swagger replaced by a scowl. Despite his diminished appearance, the man radiated defiance. As the proceedings began, Chris's lawyer argued that the seized assets were obtained legally and should be returned. The prosecution countered with a detailed account of Chris's fraudulent activities, backed by testimony from Lisa and others who had been manipulated by him. When it was Mark's turn to testify, he stood tall, his voice steady as he recounted the ways Chris had upended his life. He spoke of the financial losses, the threats, and the emotional toll on his family. Every word was a nail in the coffin of Chris's case. The pivotal moment came when Lisa took the stand. Though visibly nervous, she delivered a damning testimony, detailing her unwitting involvement in Chris's schemes and providing crucial evidence that tied him to the offshore accounts. Her words left no room for doubt. Chris had orchestrated everything, using people like Lisa as pawns in his game. Chris's reaction was explosive. He shouted accusations of betrayal, his composure unraveling in front of the judge and jury. His outburst only solidified the prosecution's case, painting him as a desperate man grasping at straws. After hours of deliberation, the judge delivered the verdict. Chris's motion was denied, and his remaining assets were to be forfeited to his victims. The ruling was a victory, but more importantly, it marked the end of Chris's influence over Mark's life. As Chris was led out of the courtroom, he glared at Mark, his eyes filled with hatred. But for the first time, Mark didn't feel fear. He felt free. The weeks following the trial were a whirlwind of activity as Mark worked to rebuild the stability Chris had tried to destroy. He finalized the sale of his old house and moved into a new home with Sarah and the kids, a fresh start for all of them. Sarah's presence was a constant source of comfort, and their relationship deepened as they navigated this new chapter together. For Emma and Jake, the changes were challenging, but Mark ensured they felt loved and supported every step of the way. One evening, as the family sat on their back porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon, Mark felt a sense of peace he hadn't known in years. The battle had been long and arduous, but it had shaped him into a stronger, wiser man. "I never thought we'd get here," Sarah said, her hand resting on his. Mark smiled, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "Neither did I, but I'm glad we did." If you're inspired by this story of resilience and redemption, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful tales like this one. The sense of victory following the courtroom verdict against Chris lingered in the air, but Mark knew the journey wasn't over. The final stages of this tumultuous chapter loomed, and with it, the last remnants of tension began to unravel. Every step forward felt like peeling back layers of unresolved emotions, each more intense than the last. Mark's life began to settle into a new rhythm. The move to his new home with Sarah and the kids marked a fresh start, but there was still an undercurrent of unease. While Chris was no longer a direct threat, the psychological scars he'd left behind weren't as easily dismissed. Late one evening, Mark sat on the back porch with Sarah, the soft hum of cicadas filling the air. "Do you ever think about what could have happened?" he asked, his voice heavy with contemplation. Sarah placed a reassuring hand on his. "Of course, but what matters is what did happen. You fought back. You protected your family. That's what I think about." Mark nodded, her words offering a small measure of comfort. Yet, deep down, he couldn't shake the feeling that there was one final challenge waiting for him. The sense of foreboding crystallized when Mark received an unexpected package in the mail. It was unmarked, with no return address. Inside, he found a single USB drive and a handwritten note that read, "There's always more to the story." Mark's heart pounded as he inserted the drive into his laptop. A folder titled Final Proof appeared, containing videos, emails, and financial documents that revealed the full extent of Chris's schemes. But what caught Mark's attention was a video labeled The Deal. The video showed Chris in a dimly lit office, speaking to an unidentified man. Their conversation was cryptic but unmistakably sinister. They discussed securing leverage against Mark and hinted at a contingency plan that hadn't been uncovered during the trial. Mark's stomach churned as he realized the fight might not be over after all. The video ended with Chris saying, "If I go down, he goes down with me." Mark immediately called Tom, forwarding him the contents of the USB drive. Within hours, Tom had identified the man in the video as Victor Morales, a notorious fixer known for operating in the shadows of high-stakes corporate fraud. "This guy doesn't play around," Tom warned. "If he's still active, you need to be prepared for anything." Mark's anxiety spiked, but he channeled it into action. With Tom's help, he began digging deeper into Victor's connections and piecing together the details of Chris's contingency plan. The breakthrough came unexpectedly. Tom discovered that Victor had been using a warehouse on the outskirts of town as a base of operations. The evidence suggested that the warehouse held the remaining documents and assets tied to Chris's schemes, proof that could either exonerate or further implicate Mark. Determined to put an end to this once and for all, Mark decided to confront Victor. Tom insisted on accompanying him, along with law enforcement backup. But Mark knew this wasn't just about legal closure, it was personal. The night of the confrontation was tense. Mark and Tom arrived at the warehouse under cover of darkness, their nerves heightened as they approached the building. The police were stationed nearby, ready to intervene if necessary. Inside, the warehouse was eerily silent, the air thick with the scent of oil and rust. Mark's footsteps echoed as he entered a large, open space filled with filing cabinets and stacks of boxes. At the center of the room stood Victor, a tall, imposing figure with a calm but menacing demeanor. "I was wondering when you'd show up," Victor said, his voice smooth but laced with disdain. Mark clenched his fists, his anger barely contained. "This ends now. No more threats, no more games." Victor chuckled, his confidence unshaken. "You're brave, I'll give you that. But bravery doesn't mean much when you're in over your head." Mark stepped forward, his voice steady. "I have everything I need to bring you down. The police are right outside. It's over, Victor." For a moment, Victor's composure faltered, but he quickly recovered. "You think you're in control. Chris might be gone, but his legacy lives on. You can't stop what's already in motion." The tension reached its peak as Victor moved toward a nearby desk, his hand hovering over a drawer. Mark's instincts screamed danger, and he shouted for Victor to stop. Before the situation could escalate further, Tom entered the room with two officers, their presence halting Victor in his tracks. The officers moved swiftly, detaining Victor and securing the warehouse. As they searched the space, they uncovered a treasure trove of evidence, documents that not only implicated Victor but also revealed the identities of others who had been complicit in Chris's schemes. Mark watched as Victor was led away, a sense of relief washing over him. It was finally over. In the days following the confrontation, Mark felt a weight lifting from his shoulders. The evidence from the warehouse ensured that Chris's network was dismantled completely, and Victor's arrest marked the final chapter in the saga. Mark met with Carter to finalize the legal proceedings, ensuring that his name was cleared of any lingering doubts. "You've done it," Carter said, his voice filled with pride. "You've taken back control." With the nightmare behind him, Mark focused on the future. His relationship with Sarah continued to flourish, built on a foundation of trust and mutual respect. Emma and Jake thrived in their new home, their laughter filling the house with a warmth Mark hadn't felt in years. One evening, as the family gathered for dinner, Mark raised his glass in a toast. "To new beginnings," he said, his voice steady and filled with hope. "And to the people who make life worth fighting for." As the sun set on the horizon, painting the sky in hues of gold and pink, Mark felt an overwhelming sense of peace. The battle had been long and grueling, but it had forged him into a stronger, wiser man. He had faced betrayal, danger, and doubt, but in the end, he had emerged victorious, not just for himself, but for the family he held dear. If this story of resilience and redemption has inspired you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful tales like this one. The aftermath of Victor's arrest brought a sense of finality that had eluded Mark for so long. The tangled web Chris had created was finally dismantled, and the shadows that had lingered over Mark's life began to lift. For the first time in years, he felt as though he could truly breathe again. Mark's first priority was his family. The stress of the past year had taken its toll on Emma and Jake, but they proved to be remarkably resilient. With the danger behind them, Mark focused on giving his kids the stability and love they deserved. He attended every soccer game, every school play, and every parent-teacher conference, savoring the small moments that made life meaningful. One evening, while tucking Jake into bed, his son looked up at him and asked, "Are we safe now, Dad?" Mark smiled, his voice steady. "Yes, buddy, we're safe, and I promise I'll always keep it that way." Sarah had been Mark's rock throughout the chaos, and their bond had only grown stronger. She had been there through the darkest moments, offering unwavering support and a quiet strength that Mark had come to rely on. One sunny afternoon, as they walked hand in hand through the park, Mark stopped suddenly, turning to face her. "I don't think I would have made it through all of this without you," he said, his voice filled with emotion. Sarah smiled, squeezing his hand. "You would have. You're stronger than you think." Mark shook his head. "Maybe, but having you by my side made all the difference." It was in that moment that Mark realized he wanted to build a future with Sarah, a future filled with hope, love, and the lessons they had both learned. For Lisa, the road to redemption was long and challenging. While her cooperation with the authorities had helped dismantle Chris's network, it didn't erase the mistakes she had made. She worked tirelessly to rebuild her life, taking on a part-time job and attending therapy to confront her past choices. Mark maintained a cordial relationship with her for the sake of their kids. While the pain of her betrayal still lingered, he could see that she was making an effort to change. In time, their interactions became less strained, and they found a way to co-parent effectively. One day, as they exchanged the kids during a weekend handoff, Lisa looked at Mark with genuine gratitude. "Thank you," she said softly, "for not giving up on the kids and for being better than I deserved." Mark nodded, his voice kind but firm. "They're what matters most. We both owe it to them to do better." With the personal turmoil behind him, Mark threw himself into his work, and his efforts didn't go unnoticed. The promotion he had received months earlier turned into an opportunity to lead a high-profile project for his firm. His success earned him respect and recognition, and for the first time in years, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. One evening, after presenting a successful pitch to a major client, Mark's boss pulled him aside. "You've been through hell this year, and yet you've come out stronger," she said. "That kind of resilience is rare, Mark. I'm proud to have you on the team." Mark's chest swelled with pride. The validation wasn't just about his career, it was about proving to himself that he could overcome anything. The last loose end came in the form of a letter from the court. Chris's final appeal had been denied, ensuring that he would remain behind bars for the foreseeable future. The news brought a sense of closure that Mark hadn't realized he still needed. As he read the letter, he felt a wave of emotions: relief, vindication, and surprisingly, compassion. Chris's actions had been unforgivable, but Mark couldn't help but feel pity for the man who had lost everything in his pursuit of greed and control. Mark folded the letter and placed it in a drawer. "That chapter's closed," he said quietly to himself. Months turned into a year, and life settled into a peaceful rhythm. Mark and Sarah's relationship flourished, and they began planning for a future together. Emma and Jake adapted to their new normal, their laughter filling the house with joy that had once seemed impossible. One summer evening, as the family gathered around the fire pit in their backyard, Sarah handed Mark a small wrapped box. "What's this?" he asked, surprised. "Just open it," she said with a smile. Inside was a framed photo of Mark, Sarah, Emma, and Jake, taken during a recent hiking trip. Beneath it was an inscription, "Our New Beginning." Mark's throat tightened as he looked at the photo, his eyes brimming with tears. "Thank you," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Sarah leaned in, her voice soft. "You've built something incredible here, Mark. Don't ever forget that." As Mark sat on the porch that night, staring up at the stars, he allowed himself a moment of reflection. The journey had been long and grueling, filled with heartbreak, danger, and uncertainty. But it had also been transformative. He had learned the value of resilience, the power of love, and the importance of standing up for what mattered most. Life wasn't perfect, but it was real. And for Mark, that was enough. Sometimes, life throws us challenges we never see coming. Mark's story is a testament to the strength of the human spirit and the power of perseverance. It reminds us that even in the darkest moments, there is always a path forward. If this story has inspired you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel for more incredible tales of resilience and redemption. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.